Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into a topic that's been generating a lot of buzz lately. Autism rates among Somali immigrants.
Yeah, it's something that's really caught the attention of researchers and the public alike.
It seems like every day there's a new study or article trying to unpack this complex issue, so we're going to try to break it down for you.
Exactly, because it's not a simple issue,
Yeah,
but it is a really important one.
absolutely. And it's one that hits close to home for many communities.
Definitely. And to really understand it, we need to look at it from different angles,
Yeah.
considering the social, cultural, and scientific factors at play.
Okay, so let's start with the elephant in the room, the statistics. We keep hearing about these higher rates of autism diagnosis among Somali immigrants. What's the deal with that?
Right, so there was this study in Minnesota, and they found that 1 in 32 Somali children were diagnosed with autism.
Wow, 1 in 32.
It's significantly higher than the national average, which is 1 in 54.
Okay, so that's a pretty stark difference. So does that mean that being Somali makes you more likely to be autistic?
Well, hold on a second. It's not quite as simple as that. We have to be really careful about jumping to conclusions based on one statistic.
Right, there's always more to the story.
Exactly. And in this case, that more involves understanding the difference between prevalence and incidence.
Okay, break it down for us.
So prevalence is like a snapshot in time. It tells us how many people in a population have a certain condition at any given moment.
So, like in that Minnesota study, it's saying that at that time, 1 in 32 Somali children in that specific population had an autism diagnosis.
You got it. Now, incidence, on the other hand, is all about new cases over a period of time. It's like tracking the flow of a river, how many new drops are added over, say, a year.
So the Minnesota study doesn't tell us if more Somali children are being newly diagnosed with autism, just that a certain percentage of them have been diagnosed.
Exactly. So we can't say for sure why that number is higher. Is it genetics? Is it environmental factors?
Or is it something else entirely, like cultural differences in how autism is perceived and diagnosed?
You're hitting on all the key points. It's probably a combination of factors. There's no single answer, no magic bullet.
Okay, so let's unpack some of these possible explanations, starting with genetics. I know that autism is a complex condition, but is there a genetic component at play here?
There could be. See, our genes, they're like this instruction manual for our bodies. And sometimes there are little variations in these instructions. We call them genetic markers.
Okay, so like typos in the instruction manual.
Kind of, yeah. And certain markers might make someone more likely to be autistic.
So you're saying it's possible that some of these genetic markers are more common in the Somali population?
It's a possibility that researchers are exploring. It's important to remember, though, that genes aren't destiny. Just because you have a particular gene, it doesn't mean you're guaranteed to develop a certain condition.
It's more like having a predisposition, a slight nudge in a particular direction.
Right. It's like if you have a family history of heart disease, you might be more likely to develop it, but it's not a given.
Right? Your lifestyle choices, your environment, all of that plays a role too. Which brings us to another piece of this puzzle. Environment. How could that be influencing autism rates?
Well, think about it this way. Many Somali immigrants are coming from a very different environment.
Somalia, right. A lot of them are coming from Somalia to, say, Minnesota.
Exactly. And that's a huge shift. We're talking about different climates, different exposures to sunlight, different diets.
So you're saying those changes could have an impact on how our genes actually express themselves, right? It's like your body's instruction manual is being read in a totally different context,
Yeah.
and that can change how things turn out.
Exactly. And there's actually been some really interesting research on this, particularly when it comes to vitamin D.
Vitamin D,
Yeah.
like from sunlight.
Yep. See, our bodies naturally produce vitamin D when we're exposed to sunlight, but
But Somalia gets a lot more sun than, say, Minnesota.
exactly. So when people move from a sunny climate to a place where they're not getting as much sun, their vitamin D levels can take a hit.
And that's where the connection to autism comes in.
Right. Studies have shown a link between vitamin D deficiency during pregnancy and early childhood and an increased risk of autism.
Wow, that's fascinating. I mean, it makes you wonder how many other environmental factors could be playing a role that we haven't even considered yet. The food we eat, the air we breathe, the chemicals we're exposed to.
Absolutely. It's a whole area of research that's really heating up. And then, of course, there's the cultural aspect, which is just as important, but often overlooked.
Right, we can't ignore the social and cultural context. So how do those factors play into this whole autism conversation, especially within the Somali community?
Well, we have to approach this with sensitivity because it's about understanding a community's beliefs, traditions, and how they view the world.
Absolutely. Every culture has its own way of understanding differences, right?
Exactly. And sometimes those cultural understandings might not line up perfectly with Western medical definitions.
So, what might be seen as a clear sign of autism to one person could be interpreted totally differently through the lens of another culture.
That's a great way to put it. And in some cultures, there might be a stigma attached to mental health conditions like autism.
So, families might be hesitant to seek a diagnosis, even if they notice something is different.
It's a possibility. They might worry about being judged or misunderstood by their community. And sometimes cultural differences can lead to misunderstandings with healthcare providers, too.
Because if you're not on the same page culturally, it's going to be really hard to communicate effectively about something as complex as autism.
Precisely. And that's why cultural competency is so important in healthcare.
It's not just about speaking the same language. It's about understanding the cultural nuances, the unspoken rules, the different ways of seeing the world. But let's be real. If someone isn't getting diagnosed because of these cultural misunderstandings, what kind of impact does that have?
It can have huge consequences, both for the individual and their family. I mean, imagine you're a parent and you know something is different about your child, but you don't know what it is or how to help.
And maybe you're even afraid to ask for help because you don't want to be judged or misunderstood.
Exactly. And without a diagnosis, it's harder to access the right support services, the right therapies.
And early intervention is so crucial when it comes to autism.
Absolutely. It can make a world of difference in a child's development, but only if those early signs are caught and addressed.
So we've talked about the challenges, the complexities of this issue, but I want to shift gears here a bit and talk about solutions. What can we do about this? How do we bridge this cultural gap and make sure that everyone gets the care they need and deserve?
It's like we need to build a bridge, right? A bridge of understanding and support.
That's a great way to put it. And there are a lot of people working hard to do just that.
So where do we even begin to build that bridge? What are the building blocks? Well, one of the most important things is community education. And I don't mean just translating some pamphlets into Somali and calling it a day.
Right. It's got to be more than just checking a box.
Exactly. It's about engaging with the Somali community in a way that's culturally sensitive, using their languages, addressing their specific concerns.
So meeting them where they are.
Exactly. We need to create materials and resources that resonate with their cultural values and beliefs.
And create a safe space for open and honest dialogue, right?
Absolutely. Because sometimes just having that space to talk, to ask questions without judgment can make all the difference.
It can be hard to even know where to start if you're dealing with something like autism and you're not sure who to turn to.
Exactly. And that's why it's crucial to have culturally competent healthcare providers who understand these nuances.
Right, because even with the best intentions, if a doctor doesn't understand a family's cultural background, it can create all sorts of barriers.
Absolutely. It can be really hard to build trust and communicate effectively when you're coming from completely different cultural perspectives. We need healthcare providers who are trained in cultural humility, who are willing to listen and learn from the communities they serve.
It's like that saying, it takes a village. We need everyone on board, from community leaders to healthcare providers to educators to support families and individuals with autism.
I love that analogy because it really does take a village. And those support networks, those connections within the community, they're crucial.
Especially for families who might be feeling isolated or overwhelmed.
Exactly. Knowing that you're not alone, that there are other people who understand what you're going through, it can make a world of difference.
And it's not just about emotional support, right? It's also about sharing practical information and resources.
Absolutely. Like where to find support groups, what therapies are available, how to navigate the education system.
And speaking of therapies and interventions, we've got to make sure those are culturally sensitive too, right?
You hit the nail on the head. A one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't work.
Every individual with autism is unique, and their culture plays a huge role in shaping who they are.
Exactly. So we need interventions that are tailored to the individual and their family's needs. Interventions that are developed in partnership with the Somali community.
So to wrap things up for our listeners today, we started with this really interesting but complex topic of autism rates among Somali immigrants.
And we've learned that it's not about placing blame or pointing fingers.
It's about understanding the interplay of factors at play: genetics, environment, and culture, and how they all contribute to this complex picture.
And most importantly, it's about approaching this issue with empathy, sensitivity, and a commitment to finding solutions that work for everyone.
Because at the end of the day, everyone deserves the support they need to thrive, regardless of their cultural background.
Well said. I couldn't agree more.
It's been a pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation.
And to all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, knowledge is power, and your understanding can help create a more inclusive and supportive world for everyone. We'll see you next time.